In Masechta Tainis,
the Gemara discusses the tragedy of the great king and hero of the Jewish people, Yoshiyahu HaMelech. As you know, Yoshiyahu was raised by the anti-Torah element. His father was no good, and his father was executed, was killed by the loyal Torah element. And so, when Yoshiyahu became king, he was in the hands of the wicked ones. They were his tutors. They put him on the throne. He was only 8 years old. And they hoped that he would be pudding in their hands. It so happened that he didn't become pudding. When he was yet a lad, it occurred to him to start inquiring about his first ancestor, David. David was his ideal. How it got into his head, we can conjecture. They were circulating around Kehanim of the old school, Talmidei Chachamim, and in some way he came in contact with them. And he began to inquire after the ways of David, his father, his ancestor. And it became this boy's ambition to emulate David. At first, his supporters did not notice the change in him. It was so gradual. But when he was 16 years old, he caused a revolution to take place. And he began to rid the palace and the government of all the disloyal. Uchomoihu lo hoyo melech asher shov el Hashem b'chol libei. Like Yoshiyahu, there never was one who returned with all his heart to Hashem. There were pious kings before him, great tzaddikim and Talmidei Chachamim, but they had always been so. He was the one who made a comeback, and he broke away from his advisors. And he caused a tremendous teshuvah movement. We have to know that the elimination of idolatry from the Jewish people was due mainly to the efforts of Yoshiyahu. This young man began a campaign with all his heart, and he began to investigate, to search out, and he cleansed the nation of that ancient malady, was ancient sickness. We don't realize what idolatry is. We think it's stupid. Like Yoshiah describes, a man hauls in a log from the field, a log of wood. Half of the log he chops up and uses for firewood, to bake and to cook. And the other half he forms into a god to whom he bows down. So it sounds silly. If you can burn one half under your pot in the kitchen, and the other half is a god. You don't realize, in the ancient days, there was a fatal attraction to idolatry. You know, there are certain waves of the future. They're called waves of the future. At the time, it seems this wave is going to sweep the world, and it'll continue forever. But it has a crest, and after a while the crest is crestful. After a while the wave subsides, and people look back and they ridicule what was once admired as the ideal of the day. That's how the Yetzer Hara works. Yitzrei shel Adam mischadesh olav b'chol yom. It always works by novelty. If it didn't have novelty, it could never overcome, couldn't conquer the hearts of men. In every generation, there's a new form to the Yetzer Hara. There you hear, for instance, on all sides, oh and oh, everybody is so entranced, they're enthralled by sex. A new thing, the world never had it before, you know. A new discovery, sex. Of course, people have any sense. I mean, the Torah nation, they look at them like lunatics. But in the street, It's considered as if it was a new discovery, something that our forefathers never even dreamed about, and they're excited over it. Well, every generation is something like that. It's only our generation is one of the lowest, the most foolish, that such a stupid kind of wave is able to lift them up for a little while at least and to excite them. A generation ago, you need something more powerful than that. So it was evolution. Evolution was the wave. It caught the imagination of men and swept them off their feet.
It's 13:30.
And they forgot to investigate. They forgot to ask questions. They accepted it blindly, and they were swept along. Now, if you look back, you can see in every generation there's a new wave. In that day, it was a wave of idolatry. It was a big wave. We shouldn't think it was foolish. Idolatry was based on sound, logical foundations. The Rambam, Hilchas Avigdor, explains how idolatry originated. Idolatry had arguments behind it. The argument was that it's the highest service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to honor the great celestial bodies which he created. Look, he made the sun. The sun is his servant. The sun is very important. Now, when a king confers knighthood on a man, he wants us to honor his nobility. If we would dishonor those that are elevated to the peerage by the king, it's a slight on the king. And therefore the ancients said, since HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the sun such a prominent place in our lives, we live from the sun. It supplies us with everything. So therefore, it's our duty to respect the sun, to show acts of reverence towards the sun, and these in turn reflect on the greatness of the Creator who made the sun. That's how idolatry began. And therefore images were erected to the sun, but it was intended as an honor to the Creator of the universe. Only after some time passed, all the enthusiasm for the images continued after having forgotten the origin of this enthusiasm. All the piety that went into idolatry continued with the idols, but the origin had been forgotten. Now, when Yoshiyahu came to the throne, idolatry was at its height. Everyone ran after the worship of the idols, outside of the Jewish people. And even in the Jewish people, there was an element now that had been tainted. This element had been raised up by Menashe. Menashe was a king longer than anyone else. And Menashe was the worst king of all. And Menashe had introduced idolatry, and he poisoned the nation. And his grandson, Yoshiyahu, was the one who cleansed the Jewish people of this day. So now we have this great man, a burning idealist, a young man. No one was more sincere than Yoshiyahu. And he's beloved and admired by the people. He called together the entire nation. He spoke to them. And they all made a covenant with the king. They promised him they'll do their best to eradicate any vestiges that remained of idolatry. And he was their leader, their hero. All of a sudden, at the age of 38, he was shot down and he died. He perished in the flower of his young manhood. Now we have to understand that those days were not like these days. This is important for us to realize. Up to the end of the first Beis Hamikdash, such things didn't happen because the conduct that HaKadosh Baruch Hu maintained for his people was called Gilui Ponim. His presence was open and revealed. It's important. Tzaddikim were openly demonstrated to have the favor of Hashem on their side. A young man of 38 who was so devoted to Torah, to service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, should be cut down in his bloom. Such accidents, as we call them, didn't happen before the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Afterwards, it could happen. HaKadosh Baruch Hu then went into Hester Ponim, V'honuchi hastir astir ponai mikem. I will conceal my face from you. After the Churban of the first Beis HaMikdash, things were different. But beforehand, this couldn't happen. A Rosha, yes. But a tzaddik should be cut down? It couldn't happen. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu's system was to show his presence. And therefore the righteous were encouraged. And the wicked were the ones who suffered. If you study the entire history up till the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, you'll see this principle in practice. That's why David speaks that way. Shlomo speaks that way. They speak as if it was a simple axiom that the righteous will prosper in this world too. After the Churban, then we have question, Yirmiyah, ask Madua Derech Hashem Tzalecha, and so on. It's after the Churban. But before the Churban, it was the Derech of Gilui. HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself. And here we have such an astounding exception. Yoshiyahu, the great tzaddik, suddenly lost his life. Now what happened? Paro Necho, that's Paro the lame. Paro Necho decided to embark on a campaign against the king of Assyria. But to get to Assyria, he found it necessary to march through Eretz Yisrael. Yoshiyahu HaMelech sent to Paro and forbade him to enter his domain. And Paro replied, I am not coming with any malicious intent. Allow me passage through your land. And don't hinder me. Yoshiyahu quoted at that time a verse from the Torah, that if you will obey and you will fulfill my laws, then the cherev lo sa'avar be'aretzechem, no sword will pass through your land. So Yoshiyahu said, it's not necessary to tell us that a cherev shel milchama, a sword of war, won't pass through. But he's telling us in that parasha all the blessings. After he gets through with all the blessings for keeping the Torah, he tells us that a sword won't pass through your land. So you must say, even a cherev shel sholem, not only a cherev shel milchama won't pass through, that's superfluous, after telling us the foregoing blessings. But a cherev shel sholem won't go through. So relying on that, after all, we're doing the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the entire nation is cooperating. So when else, if not now, can we rely on this promise? He relied on the promise of the Torah. And therefore he came forth with his army to oppose Paro's passage. At that time, Paro's archers shot a volley of arrows, and Yoshiyahu